Hello, I'm Colbi Layne Hogan, and I work with the Teaching with Primary Sources program at MTSU's Center for Historic Preservation. Today, I'd like to talk with you about Oak Ridge, a city in East Tennessee that you might have heard of or even visited. Oak Ridge was established by the federal government in 1942 and quickly became Tennessee's fifth largest city. Despite that, you wouldn't have found it on a map during the time. That's because Oak Ridge, first called the Kingston Demolition Range, was part of the top secret Manhattan Project. It was a mission that involved some of America's leading scientists and military officials in an effort to develop atomic weaponry during World War II. Oak Ridge is known for its fantastic history, its scientific developments, and the role that it played in the Manhattan Project. What is lesser known is what became of those who lived in the region before Oak Ridge was established. Prior to 1942, the 56,000-acre region that became the Oak Ridge Reservation was home to roughly 3,000 people. They lived in rural farming communities like Scarborough, Elsa, which was a railroad stop community, Robertsville, which is located in what is now the heart of Oak Ridge, New Hope, and Wheat, that was on the Roane County line. Wheat was the largest of these communities, and it was well known as an educational center. People came from all over to attend Wheat High School, which was accredited, and also a college there. There were also multiple churches in the region. There were stores and schools and a lot of farms, some of them where folks had lived for generations, even centuries. In 1942, the region was chosen by the federal government for a number of reasons to be part of the Manhattan Project. Some of those include access to nearby water sources, TVA's electricity, and railroads. The topography of the region was also very important. The hills and valleys provided protection and isolation for the plants that were built as part of the Manhattan Project. Should an accident occur at any of the plants, they would be insulated from each other and also from the housing regions of what would become the new city. Officials from the Army Corps of Engineers appraised each tract of land in the original 56,000 acres and notified property owners of their subsequent displacement. Approximately 1,000 families were then forced to relocate in a matter of months. Some property owners were given just 2 weeks to leave their home. Displaced residents from Anderson and Roane counties often had to leave behind their livestock, crops, farming equipment, and other household items. This was because they had no transportation to move their property, or often they didn't have any spot to store what they had at their farms where they were moving to. Things were just too fast once they were notified of their displacement. After they vacated their properties, former residents were prohibited from returning. There was a perimeter fence with armed guards to stop them should they try to return. Losing their homes and land was especially tragic given the nature of these pre-Oak Ridge communities. Many of the former residents were farmers, and they had made improvements to their properties for generations. However, when their land was seized, the property improvements were not valued by the federal government's appraisers as much as they were by their former owners. Most of the property owners were dissatisfied then with their payouts. Many of them took their cases to federal court and demanded more money. Most of them who went to federal court were able to receive more money. However, they were never able to replicate what had been taken from them. Financially, that was due to the increase in demand and the prices of farms in neighboring communities that rose once so many people in that region were displaced and looking for properties to buy. Perhaps more heartbreaking, though, was that many of the farms that had been in the same families for centuries had created a sense of community that was impossible to recreate once the residents were displaced. Even if people didn't have family in the region, if they lived in these small communities, their neighbors became like family. Once former residents were removed, their communities were mostly razed. Most of the farmhouses, the outbuildings and barns, churches and schools were burned. This was the quickest and most cost-effective way to clear the land for the enormous plants and the new housing that was needed for Oak Ridgers to come and live and work. Not every property was razed. Some of them were used during World War II as housing for government officials or for training, but not many buildings remain from the pre-Oak Ridge, the pre-1942 era. During its wartime peak, Oak Ridge housed about 75,000 people. These were scientists, construction workers, janitors, secretaries, machinists, grocers, and the like. They played an absolutely critical role during World War II. Without their efforts, the Manhattan Project would not have been successful, and World War II most definitely would have turned out differently. But while we think about the sacrifices that these Americans made during the war, let us not forget the other people, the Tennesseans, who gave their homes and their livelihoods so that the Manhattan Project could succeed. If you'd like to learn more about Oak Ridge or pre-Oak Ridgers, check out one of our newest national parks, the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. It's in Oak Ridge, and it's also it's a 3-site park that's also in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Hanford, Washington.